now I have the pleasure of introducing Hannah. I've known Hannah, I can't remember how many years now, Hannah, but I think I knew her husband first, Darren, and then I met Hannah, and Darren and I used to work together actually at our previous firm. Hannah, Darren calls her kind of his magic and kind of this secret weapon or something, and I think he's right. They work together in Challis and Co. Darren's a search consultant. Hannah, I think, I think Hannah's the brain behind all of that. She's spent, gosh, over a decade in Macquarie as the global head of talent, where she built and led a function assessing people, looking at potential, looking at leadership development and culture and engagement. And that's obviously been a very successful time during that period for Macquarie as they grew. Her background is in human capital, organizational leadership development, and she worked in SHL initially, and she's a registered psychologist, amongst a whole bunch of other things that she does. And so when Hannah agreed to speak to the group and give us a little bit of her time, we thought, we were delighted. And so she's going to speak to us on how to use psychology, I think, to kind of manage ourselves during this time and a whole bunch of other things. So I'm really happy that she's able to speak to us, and and she can combine the psychology practice with real life business practice too. So Hannah, I think without further ado, I'm just going to hand it to you. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kokong, and thank you, Peter. I was a lot younger, a lot slimmer when I first met Kokong. I think time has been kinder to him than it has been to me. Look, ideally, we'd be meeting in person. I appreciate some of you are dialing in from other parts of the world. And I also appreciate that we've gotten used to Zooming as a significant part of our lives. But I do want to acknowledge this would be a good conversation to have around a circle in the same room. That being said, I think I hope you'll get value from what I present. I'm very mindful that as we talk about well-being, it's really been a popularized concept. And so it should, because there's an enormous amount of very good information that you can use, that we can use to increase our levels of satisfaction, happiness, and well-being. And so I'm conscious that for many of you, you'll be familiar with some of the information that I present. But I'm also conscious of the fact that it doesn't matter how many times we hear things. Often repetition is really invaluable. And also what we know about well-being, it's not what you know, it's what you put into practice that makes the difference. And so again, I hope if you are and have adopted some wellbeing practices, maybe I can just give you one or two extra strategies for the toolkit. So to the extent that I can take questions during the presentation, I'm happy to. Because there's so many of you, practically it may make sense just to wait until I get through it. But ordinarily this would be a very interactive discussion. And so if there's something you want to say that contributes to the discussion, I'd rather you don't wait. Just put your hand up and I'll come to you. So we're living in unprecedented times. How many times have we heard that expression? We're living in unprecedented times. I think we've heard it way too many times. So, what does that mean? Well, I think it means that the level of uncertainty that each and every one of us are experiencing, we've never experienced it before. Add that to what I understand for most of you is a point of transition and reflection as you've exited one role or one career and thinking about your next role or possibly a very different career. It does amplify that sense of uncertainty. I'm conscious that for many people, they think, get the right job and that will improve my mental health. I'm going to argue the reverse is also true. Focusing on our mental health will actually help increase our feelings of self-esteem, our confidence, and better position us to capitalize on the opportunities that present to secure the next role. And so the argument here is there are lots of things within our control that we can do to drive our own well-being and to secure the next opportunity that's going to tick as many of the boxes as it can for us. With an emphasis on, COVID, and for those in Sydney, we are in lockdown and we're facing probably a longer lockdown than we originally thought. The focus has very much been on how do we safeguard our physical health. But I think also many of us know that it's not just about our physical health. We have to protect our mental, psychological health as well. The science of positive psychology is the study of psychological strengths and positive emotions. It's a relatively new discipline. We're not talking more than a decade or two. Certainly, I didn't study it at university. So really in the last 10 years, we've seen this paradigm shift in psychology, focusing away from mental ill health, what is wrong with people, to starting to focus on mental health and what is right with people. Positive psychology has uncovered many factors that explain why and how people flourish. And the time is absolutely right for us to be thinking about how we apply this science. In this session, I'm going to take you back to the earliest model of well-being that started by one of the founding fathers of the positive psychology movement. It's one of the most robustly tested models of well-being. A lot of what you read and see will have elements that come from this, but it may be that in taking you back to one of the original models, it might just expose you to some new ideas and things that you hadn't thought of, or get you thinking about things in a slightly different way. If you're like most people, we tend to think about what is wrong with our life rather than what is right with our life. Unfortunately, that's part of evolution. That's in our hardwiring in our system. And so we tend to focus first on the negative rather than the positive. And what we do know psychologically is what we focus on in our minds grows within our minds. And so our naturally negative predisposition of thinking often leads us to think in suboptimal ways. What we need to do is optimize our thinking or rewire our thinking to shift our mindset to notice the good rather than just the bad. And this is where we've seen the intersection of positive psychology and a lot of advances in neuroplasticity and the idea that our brains are much more versatile than we originally thought. And so some of the tips and strategies are actually about hardwiring different brain pathways to help you reflect on what's going right in your life and the more positive aspects than what's maybe not going so right. And so that's hopefully that's what I'm going to cover, and hopefully that's going to be of value to all of you. So what is well-being? Well-being is more than living the good life. It's about having meaning in our life. It's about fulfilling our potential and feeling our lives are worthwhile. It's more than just happiness. As well as being satisfied and happy, well-being means developing as a person, being fulfilled and making a contribution. Can everyone see the seesaw slide? Well-being is not just one thing, right? It's multifaceted. It relates to our physical health, it relates to our mental or psychological health, and it relates to our social health. It's dynamic. It's not about being happy all of the time. In fact, that notion of always being happy leads us to unrealistic expectations and actually undermines our well-being. So well-being is the balance between our pool of resources and the challenges we face. Each time we meet a challenge, our resources come into play. Our resources can be physical, psychological, or social resources, and we'll talk more about these. Where we meet those challenges, ably meet those challenges, our well-being increases. Where we struggle to match our resources to the challenges at hand, our well-being will reduce. But the point of the seesaw is that our well-being is constantly evolving and shifting, and that we can take significant control over our individual states of well-being. At the same time, each person tends to have a natural baseline position that we seem to revert back to, a homeostasis, if you like. And so the idea here is you think about your well-being, think about it as something that you actively influence and have control over. Think about it as something that shifts depending on how you feel socially, mentally, and physically, and how you are positioned to respond to the current challenges at play. So that's well-being. I think it's a very empowering way to think about how do we enhance our own sense of self. Let's talk about the factors that impact well-being. So this is a very simple model. It's called the Perma Model. And then since the early manifestation of the model, people talk about the Perma Plus model. Some of you may have heard of Martin Seligman. He's certainly known as the founding father of positive psychology. He was the president of the American Psychological Association for many years and a very influential researcher, practitioner, and professional psychologist. This model only dates back to 2011. Can you believe it? It talks about how new this is as a domain of psychology. The model is predicated on the fact that there are 6 different levers that impact our well-being. That's where the PERMA comes in. The P is for positive emotion, the E is for engagement, the R is for relationships, the M is for meaning, and the A is for accomplishment. I want to talk about each of those. The plus is a recognition that there are a number of other things, more physical things that drive our well-being, namely exercise, nutrition, and sleep. There's been an enormous focus on exercise, so I'm not going to spend much time talking about exercise today. I think we all know what we should be doing, and probably many of you are doing it, aided by phenomenal technological advances to help us track and monitor and remind us to engage in exercise. Nutrition, once again, I think there is so much good research and practice around the influence of food on our well-being, so I'm not going to go into any detail about that. And sleep, I think really over the last 5-6 years, we've seen an enormous amount of research about sleep. I'm not going to spend enormous amount talking about sleep, but I will maybe talk about one strategy that we know makes a really big difference. So let's come back up to the core of the Perma model, positive emotions. There are so many positive emotions we experience: joy, gratitude, serenity, hope, amusement, pride, inspiration, love, just to name a few. So we were talking about positive emotion. We were talking about different types of positive emotions. When we experience positive emotion, we tend to report greater life satisfaction, decreased vulnerability to depression, enhanced learning, and especially an enhanced ability to engage in creative thinking and creative processes. This won't surprise you, but when we feel positively, we are also more inspired to take action. So we are more likely to initiate and take action when we feel positively. So that's positive emotion. The one thing here, which we'll get to strategies, but it's how we think about a range of different emotions, and how we are very mindful and deliberate and conscious in terms of understanding our emotional states and how to shift our emotional states from less positive to more positive emotions. Engagement. In fact, Martin Seligman is also known for coming up with the concept of being in flow or flourishing. And so when we're talking about engagement, we're talking about being in a state of flow. What do we mean by that? We mean we are so immersed in what we're doing in the present moment that it completely captivates our attention and our energy, and we don't think about what we have to do next, what's happening after this, or what we have to deal with, tomorrow or after that. We are very much present and focused in the moment. It's about doing work, doing something that we enjoy for its own sake, right? Rather than doing something that we have to do. When we are in flow, our concentration is stronger, we feel happier, we feel more active, and ultimately we feel more satisfied. So that's engagement. Let's move to the R in Perma, relationships. Wellbeing is enhanced by surrounding ourselves with people, family, friends, neighbours, different members within our community, with whom we can share positive experiences. I think Peter and Kokong's initiative in this transition group is a phenomenal example of creating a community of people with common goals and challenges, and giving you all an opportunity to engage with others, to feel less isolated in the challenges that you face and draw strength and inspiration from each other. So when I talked about social resources and social challenges, we're really talking about relationships. Let's talk about the M in Perma, which is meaning. Meaning is about connecting to something larger than oneself. As a daughter of a Holocaust survivor, I take a lot of inspiration from Viktor Frankl's work in An Inspirational Man's Search for Meaning. He says that our deepest desire is to search for meaning and purpose in life. Something he knew, obviously, all too well, given his experience in the Holocaust. So meaning is closely related to personal growth and the pursuit of valued goals, as well as belonging to something that is bigger than oneself, whether that's family, whether that's religion, whether that's spirituality. I think we've seen a real move in the corporate space, an example, to giving employees opportunities to volunteer their time, not just to give money, to engage actively to support important causes. And I think this is just one example. Obviously, we all know the younger generations are much more focused on giving and social justice, maybe than I was when I was a young adult. I think all of this is that drive to finding meaning beyond ourselves. This is probably one of the factors that drives long-term well-being, sustained long-term well-being. This is not one of those quick fix, I want to improve my mood, but it really does go to sustain enhanced well-being over time. And the last one, which is the A, accomplishment, is about working towards and achieving goals. When we are mindful and cognizant of the achievements that we've made, it builds our self-esteem. More often than not, we forget the good stuff that we do. Remember, we tend to be programmed to focus on what we don't do well rather than what we do well. So this is about thinking about reminding yourself as to all of the things that you've done well, because it will spur you to take on additional goals and build your self-esteem around your ability to do so. So they're the factors. I want you to take a moment. I'm not going to make this interactive because of time and because of Zoom, but I want you to take a moment to rate yourself on each of these. Because I think, again, one of the things that we know is if you if you measure and track how you think about your well-being, you're more likely to stick to some habits that will improve your well-being. So, one of the first things that I would do if I was coaching somebody around their well-being is get them to measure their current well-being, and we would track that over time. And so as you think about how you would score on positive emotion, here's 2 questions that might help you work out where you think you fall today. How often do you feel sad? In general, how often do you feel playful? So have a think about positive emotion. Where might you sit today? Let's move to engagement. Here are a couple of questions to think about in relation to engagement. How often do you become absorbed in what you're doing that you lose all sense of time? To what extent do you feel excited and interested in the different things that you've got planned for during your day? So that's engagement. I want you to think really broadly. For many people, engagement is actually about their hobbies and the things that they do during times of leisure. Let's look at relationships. How lonely do you feel day to day? Second question, to what extent do you receive the help and support from others that you need when you need it? That's relationships. Let's go to meaning. To what extent do you lead a purposeful and meaningful life? What do you do in your life that you feel is valuable and worthwhile? accomplishment, how much of the time do you feel you are making progress towards achieving your goals? What are the 1, 2, or 3 goals that you have set yourself, and how are you going against them? And let's talk about the overall plus, or the health factor. How satisfied are you with your current physical health? And compared to others of the same age and sex, how would you describe your health? So hopefully that gives you a sense about where you're at across each of these dimensions, where you're strong. And so, if you're a 3, 4, or 5, as we go to the next section where we start to talk about strategies, this might be about what are you doing today that you need to continue to sustain, or what might you want to ramp up? Whereas if you're a 1 or 2, it's probably worth thinking about what's one thing that I could change today that I think would make a difference and get me from being a 1 to a 2, or take me from being a 2 to a 3. So that's how I'd like you to think about the next section, which is looking at strategies. So here is some ideas, some potential strategies to think about in relation to each of these factors. Just want to reiterate the point that I made before. Knowing what you should do is not going to contribute to your well-being. I mean, I know that's obvious, but how often do we know what we should be doing and we don't change our behavior? I've tried to pick on really easy, accessible strategies that you can deploy. They're not time consuming. For some of these, it's no more than a couple of minutes every day. But the idea here is to start to practice them and habitualize them into your routine, and that will make a really big difference. I want to talk about 3 specific strategies. As we look at positive emotion, I want to talk about what do we mean by savouring, and what do we mean by a gratitude journal. And when we talk about engagement in terms of identifying and leveraging strengths, I want to point you to a resource that you may not be across that I think is a really invaluable one around understanding and working with our strengths. Some of the other strategies here, I'm not going to spend time talking about mindfulness and meditation, because again, I think there is so much information and so many good apps that take you there. Obviously, mindfulness is about focusing yourself in the present moment, and that's very much linked to the notion of engagement, which is about being in flow. Relationships, I think here you want to think about how do you build new connections, and also how do you strengthen existing relationships. Meaning, for many of you who may have more time than you normally have, the extent to which you reflect on the full purpose organisations that you have a connection with, and look to provide some time, that can be a great way to increase the meaning in your life, but also drive up your accomplishments. It's a great way to build new skills while giving back to people. So that if you're not already, that may be something that you want to reflect on. And with accomplishment, I think the key thing here is we can get into the trap of thinking that buying stuff will make us feel better. They're the extrinsic goals, having more money, In my case, I don't think a person can ever have enough shoes. Yes, I get a thrill in that moment when, the shoebox arrives, but it's very transitory. And so the idea here is really, what are those more intrinsic goals that drive our longer term sense of accomplishment? I'm sure most of you are familiar with the SMART goal methodology. It's an oldie but a goodie. It's predicated on the best of psychology research in goal setting from the 70s. And so if you've got a couple of things that you've been struggling to achieve, make them SMART goals, and that should help increase your level of motivation and commitment to achieve them. In terms of sleep, just one point here. How much sleep you need, we know varies for each person. But for most of us, we need a minimum of 7 hours and more like 8 or 9 hours. And actually, it's really important that we get that sleep roughly at around the same hours each and every night. So variable sleep patterns, even if you're getting a lot of sleep, won't give you the well-being boost that consistent sleeping will. So let's talk about savouring, then we'll go to gratitude, and then we'll end with strengths. So let's talk about savouring. What is savouring? Well, really, I know you all know what it is, but let me share my sense. It's the simple act of stepping out of our experience to review it, to really appreciate what is happening. I saw a headline just in the last couple of days about going out for an awe walk, AWE. Awe is a positive emotion. We know that when we experience awe, it really takes us out of our sense. We connect with a world that is much larger than just ourselves. And the notion of an awe walk is for those of us in lockdown, we can exercise, we can go outside to exercise, use that as an opportunity to connect with something that inspires awe in you. I'm lucky enough to be near the water. I can walk 10 minutes and I have a view of the bay where I am, and I do find it awe-inspiring to look out beyond the horizon and to reflect on the wonder of the world. And actually, it makes a difference. This is a great photo of somebody examining a flower. The more time you spend looking at that flower, the more wonderful things you notice about its beauty. And so that is the benefit of awe. And it really does, savouring things really does boost our mood. It helps us remember the good stuff in life. It encourages us to stop our mind from wandering, and it keeps us in the moment. And we will talk about gratitude separately, but savouring helps us increase our gratitude because we're thankful for the beautiful thing that we see, the wonderful experience that we're having, etc. And so the idea here is to reflect on what are the things that inspire awe in you, and how do you ensure that you focus on those things each and every day? And how do you remind yourself of those awe-inspiring things, whether you take, a photo of the view that morning on your walk? That would be, one example. So that's savouring, very simple, easy to do. We can do it at home, we can do it outside of the home. It doesn't need a lot of time, but it absolutely helps us take us out of our very busy brains and to connect with something broader than us. That's savouring. let's go to gratitude, another positive emotion. Experiencing gratitude, we know it increases our mood, it lowers our stress levels. We know it actually influences and impacts our central nervous system. And when we feel gratitude, it can do things like lower our blood pressure. And so I'm sure some of you have incorporated gratitude exercises into your day-to-day lives. There are lots of different ways of doing it. One very well-known tip is to keep a journal, keep a gratitude journal, and each and every day you might write 3 things that you're grateful for in that day. Remember, psychologically, what we focus on grows in our mind. So if we're focusing on positive emotions like gratitude, it tends to increase our overall positive affect. Another strategy is if you're sitting around having dinner with others in the family, for example, each and every person talks about the best thing that happened to them today. I think many of us are sitting around the table talking about the numbers of COVID cases, and all of the challenging stuff that we hear in the news, and that's fed to us constantly through our devices. This is an opportunity to say, you know what, let's take a little bit of control and let's reflect on the good stuff. So that's gratitude. And the last strategy is about using our signature strengths, and I'm conscious of time. There's a source here. I don't know if you can see it. Sorry, my mouse is a little bit slow. Martin Seligman and others came up with a taxonomy of signature character strengths. If you go to www.viacharacter.org, you can go online and take a very straightforward survey, 120 questions measuring these 24 character strengths. And you get a free report. All of that's for free. You can pay for more complicated reports, but in the first instance, it's an opportunity to reflect on what are those character strengths. These aren't skills that we have. These are things that are really core to our own identity, our own authenticity as to who we are, what engages us, and what we like to do, and what we're good at. And so the idea here is that if you know what your strengths are, and many of us do, but some of us might be surprised by some of the other things that emerge, then we can incorporate and use our strengths in new and different ways. The Wellbeing Boost is not using your strength in a way in which you use it today. It's recognizing a different, new way to use it. And so the website has lots of ideas and strategies for how you might say, if you're a curious person, how you might use curiosity as a strength in a very different way. And so I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to have a look at that. In summary, just to reinforce that although our minds are naturally attuned to the negative parts of our world, we absolutely have the control and can switch to a more positive mindset. The Perma Model is just one approach to increasing our well-being, but I think it's a very simple and effective one. If there are 3 things that you are going to incorporate into your routine, I would be savouring the moment, I would be expressing daily gratitude, and I would be thinking about how I can use a personal strength in a different way. Each of these things combined will increase your well-being, but the net effect of all three, I think, will make a really big difference. And if you can sustain it over a period of time and habitualize it, I think you'll see quite significant increases, enhanced, sustained increases in your well-being. Now, I've talked for way too long. Peter, my apologies, everyone, my apologies. I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Hannah. That was wonderful. Are you able to stay on a bit longer than 9 o'clock? Is that going to work for you?
Sure.
Okay. So it just occurred to me, I said at the beginning that we might do the breakout groups at 9. It's obviously almost 9, but there's so much material here that it may well be that it's good for us to reflect and absorb this, so that in 2 weeks when the group meets next, where we won't have a guest speaker, maybe that will be a good time for us then to go into those groups and discuss what you've presented to us, with the benefit of reflecting on it, maybe even putting it into practice over the next 2 weeks. But anyway, that was just a quick thought. Let's see how we go with the discussion. So just feel free to unmute yourself, and please ask Hannah questions while we have her.
Hannah, it's Gabriel here. Thank you very much for that. I don't know, this might reflect more about how I like to measure things, but are there any thoughts about the weighting of those different characteristics within that wellbeing model?
It's a great question. It's a really good question. The answer is it depends. So yes, and it's an individual thing. The way that I would think about it is, you can think about it in a number of different ways. I think you can take the approach that I suggested, which is measure, look at some of your lowest, and then see what are the focus on that. Or you might take a view, what's the easiest thing that I can influence today, and start there. So I think it's an individual decision, and I think you should choose what's going to work best for you. But I also know that you need to work on all of them. They're all important, and it's cumulative.
Thank you.
Anna, can I just ask the question that if somebody has very low esteem, is it likely that they're going to mark themselves down way below where they really are, and they're going to feel perhaps worse after doing the assessment than they did before?
Yes, Daniel, it's a great question. You're 100% right. One of the strategies, I think, if you know your worst critic, if you're very tough on yourself, and you're not in a good place, one of the strategies I would suggest is get other people who know you and whom you trust to give you their view, and to present a counter view of their experience of you. We use 360-degree feedback in our professional lives often. I'm sure many of you have been through a 360-degree process professionally, but I think who are the people that you trust, who you know are honest with you, and seek their advice and counsel as well, to give yourself a more realistic view of where you really sit. But I think also this is really less about where you fall 1 to 5. It's not a diagnosis. It's more about what you do to move from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. So it's the relative movement that I would be focusing on, even if you're starting at the low end of the scale. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Hannah. May I make an observation, Hannah? I think that your presentation is excellent. I think that the point that I would make as an employer, that we pick up very much when somebody comes into the interview, how well they feel about themselves. So this is an absolutely crucial point that we get right when we're coaching people, when we go for an interview, because actually we, as experienced employers, we can pick that up. Now, just because a person doesn't feel good about themselves doesn't mean to say they won't get a job. But if they feel confident and they feel positive, and I always encourage people, even down to practical things, when you're in transition, get up at the same time every day. Dress as if you're going to work, shave and shower, whatever you do, because you may be transitioning into a job next week because somebody says, well, can you start? And you say, yes, I can start next week. So I think the point you're making is absolutely so important that we somehow discipline ourselves so that we do address the points you're mentioning. So when we are in front of an employer at an interview, then he can pick that up.
And if I could just add to that, it's not only in the interview. One of the things that we go over with our clients, that we have a workshop on networking, and you need to feel good about yourself when you're networking as well, coming across, on the phone or in person. You need to feel like you've got it together, and a lot of that, of course, has to do with preparation. But it also very much has to do with all of the things that you're talking about this morning, and how you're thinking about things in a positive or a negative way. And you have so much control over that too.
So I want to build on that, because I think it's a really good point. If you find yourself in situations where you are interviewing and you're not feeling as strong as you normally would feel, then employ one or two of these techniques as you're making your way up the lift, or as you're dialing into the Zoom, or as you're picking up the phone, because I think it will help elevate your mood in the moment, and it will energize the overall you and the overall conversation. And so, I've talked about this in a broader context about life habits, but I think absolutely you can use these techniques in a situation to boost your affect in the moment. And obviously that's going to boost your confidence as well. Thinking about your strengths and what you've achieved is useful, because you're going to be asked about them anyway. And so making sure they are top of mind, and you're able to recall them easily and quickly as you're asked different questions, will be really invaluable.
Hannah, I've got a question. I wonder what your thoughts are around, people, and you talk about identity here. I've seen really driven executives, for example, who've been very successful in their careers for 20 or 30 years and then kind of drop off. And I look at these Perma Model, and then I go, well, every single one of them has something to do with their job. And then when their job finishes, they've lost pretty much everything. And I just wonder what your thoughts about the balance between how you get these factors from a Perma Model,
Yes,
from your job versus other things, and is there a right balance, or your thoughts about that?
It's a great question, Kokong, and it's a challenging question to answer simply. I can certainly reflect on a lot of executives who I feel have prioritized their career to the exclusion of better balance. And, I don't like talking about work-life balance, because I think it's a really fraught concept. Let's talk about relationships for a minute, right? We know that relationships are really pivotal to one's well-being. We also know that if we're working constantly, most of our relationships are formed at work. The extent to which our work relationships are authentic and real and would continue beyond the need to engage from a work point of view would be one way that I would look at it. Because I think for an executive who has focused predominantly on their career and doesn't have some of the life balance, they've got lots of relationships that they've built through their professional career. How do they parlay those relationships into a more personal relationship? That would be one way that I might think about it. So in other words, you can take strengths from one domain of your life and apply it into another life domain. But I also, I tend to work with more executives and boards now, but I've seen so many at Macquarie. I saw so many young investment bankers who really relegated their personal relationships too far down the list, and I worried that they were making sacrifices that wouldn't be in their best interests down the track. Right. So I think organisations now are much more focused on employee wellbeing. They're actually on the hook for it. Directors are liable and accountable for it. So maybe they're focused for all the wrong reasons, but I think employees get to benefit. I definitely think we're seeing generational shifts around work life and how we manage that. There is no doubt as we make big transitionary, as we face big transitions in our lives, particularly older men and women, but generally men who've really focused on work, I think it makes the transition, whether that's into a different career, into retirement, much harder. And so I recognise it's a challenge, but I also recognise that there's a lot of good stuff now that's getting people to think more broadly, and organisations are also driving this too in their own way. Kokong, I don't know if I answered the question. Maybe I raised more questions than answers.
I've got another question along those lines. I mean, it's sort of a bit related as well. And I thought it was interesting when you talked about engagement. You said how often that's related to enjoyable pursuits, more our leisure. And I guess, you know, this is a work group. And I guess we all want work that we find satisfying. And I guess that's a lot with our accomplishment and goals and whatever too. I guess something I'm thinking through is like I'm more trying to help people, I guess, who often aren't as well educated and need to take boring jobs really to sustain their families and whatever. I'm just wondering how well, can you be well and positive in those sorts of, how does that all fit is kind of the question that's raising in my mind.
Gotcha.
Not sure it's a very clearly expressed question, but
it's a complicated question for 9:06 in the morning. I think, Rosita, the first point is, I think for many of us who have had and do have very fulfilling professional careers, flow has come from the work that we do, no doubt. I think that, you know, I'm just suggesting that there are ways to get engagement and flow outside of our professional identities and work. For those people who have less autonomy, less discretion, and less engagement in their work, I think the strategies there are to connect them to what is meaningful for them. And what the work enables them to do that is meaningful. So you can look at it at two levels, right? You can look at it in terms of where can they craft more discretion and empowerment and autonomy, even if it's not at the level that you or I are used to. You know, that they're not black and white concepts.
You can still achieve something and do something valuable.
Exactly.
And every work has value,
And then the second strategy is to link the meaning of what they're doing to their broader aims and goals in life, whether that's to support or sustain a family, you know, whether that's to get some experience in a particular area that will enable them to move to the next thing. Yeah, so to draw a broader connection.
Yeah.
Do we have other questions for Hannah?
I've got an observation. Hannah, hi, I'm Hubert. Thanks for that presentation. I mean, I have come across Martin Seligman before, but it's nice to have it reinforced. Repetition is definitely beneficial. interesting your comment on gratitude. I've been keeping a gratitude journal now for the last 12 months now, but I had done it previously and then I've let it go. But one observation is that I definitely recommend it for everyone. I think it's terrific. When you do it initially, you tend to do the simple things in life which are positive in your life. But it's interesting how things change, where the more challenging things you actually are grateful for and how you've overcome them on that given day. Or things didn't turn out quite as bad as you thought, or things turned out a lot better than you expected in terms of what you're facing. So it does help you to look at things in a different perspective.
Hubert, it's a great comment, and one that I haven't talked about, which is if we do repeat the same behaviors, so if we do a gratitude journal and we tend to just reflect on the same things each and every day, sooner rather than later, the boost to our well-being will stagnate. We have to evolve what we do to continue to boost our well-being. So I think Hubert's example, where actually what he started to express gratitude around significantly shifted, deepened, and evolved, is a great example of how we need to continue to evolve in our practices. Thank you for that. I had forgotten to mention that point.
One thing that we talk to our clients about is that one day they may find themselves being grateful that they were made redundant, because look what it's opened up to them. And I think, you know, it's those possibilities that you can be grateful for as well, even in the face of the adversity that brought it about.
I was just going to say, this is Tracy. Hi, Hannah. Thanks for the presentation. I think it was really good. Some of the clients that I work with, definitely the strength I find is really quite key, because sometimes people don't know their own strengths, and they're just not aware of them. And when they do some type of strengths, either profile or test, it gives them the right words to articulate, you know, what they do well. And I find as well that giving that they can find examples of how they use those strengths, and they can actually use those in a behavioral type interview and play that out when they're going through an interview. So I think, yeah, the strengths are very key. And also I would say that the positive psychology, I think it's excellent, and it's absolutely, Simon Sinek talks a lot about, I think Simon said it's great, talks a lot about positive psychology. And one of the things that I say again to my clients before an interview, imagine yourself actually having a good interview. So, you know, before you go into the interview, think in your mind, I'm going to have a good interview. This is a good interview, and you know, kind of play it out. And almost, you know, athletes do it on an elite level, and they talk about having a good, having a good game or match or whatever it is, and it really plays into all that positive psychology. So, yeah, I just wanted to bring up to reiterate those 2 points. I think they're excellent.
Thanks, Tracy. And I agree that the sort of magic question at the end of this, everything goes right, what does that look like and how do you feel, is a great positive psychology technique, and definitely can be adapted to an interview process or a recruitment or search process.
Anna, I particularly liked your comment about it's not what you know, it's what you put into practice.
Yeah.
I think all of us this morning have certainly heard a lot of stuff that's very, very good. And I think it's a question of saying, well, we may be convinced, but are we committed?
And so I think Peter made a really practical suggestion, which is if you decide in your breakout groups to hold each other accountable for coming back in 2 weeks with 1 or 2 things that you're doing different, that may be a really effective strategy to drive up the commitment and the accountability.
No? Okay, well, thank you very much, Hannah, for joining and staying on a bit longer than 9 o'clock. It's lovely, and for giving us much food for thought.
Thanks. Best to everyone.
Thanks,
Stay
Hannah.
well, stay safe. Thank you.